Recording in progress.
Okay, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order and start with the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, may we please have a roll call?
Commissioner Scavdall,
Here.
Commissioner Levy is absent, Commissioner O'Neill is absent, Commissioner West,
Here.
Commissioner Curriasi,
Here.
Commissioner McFarland,
Here.
Commissioner Fulton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Any agenda modifications?
There are no modifications to the agenda. There is just a supplemental that came in. It's an email. It's on your dais today. It was emailed to you on Wednesday also, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Just a real quick housekeeping. Agendas are in the corner for anybody who'd like to follow along. And as we move through the meeting in our public participation opportunities, if you are calling in or are on Zoom, when we are going to ask for public comment, you can raise your hand. There's a little bit of a lag. So as soon as you hear me bring up an item and you're interested in commenting, please be sure to raise your hand. If you're calling in, you can do that by hitting *9. That, let's move to item D, public comment on non-agenda items. This is the time where folks may appear before the commission on any matter pertinent to us that is not on the agenda. So if you would like to speak on this, please approach the dais, and if you're online, please raise your hand now. Okay, I'm not seeing any participants online right now, and I'm not seeing anyone approach the dais, or the podium, not the dais. So I think we will move on to the consent agenda, item E. For this one, these are items that are routine in nature and usually approved by a single vote. However, I will poll the commission and the public to see if they would like to pull any of these items from the consent calendar, and so that we consider them separately with a vote on that matter separate from the rest of the consent agenda. So I'm going to read through the list, and if you would like me, if you're a member of the public and you'd like me to pull the item, please just raise your hand. So item E1 is the review and approval of the May 7th, 2026 action summary. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody on the commission pull it, and I'm not seeing any members of the public raise their hand. Item E2, Cisco Farms conditional use permits and zoning clearance certificates modification.
Clarification, that is a continuance to a date uncertain.
Oh, thank you. Missed that piece. Okay. And it is a continuation, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. Item E3, amendment to general plan safety element to include updated hazard mitigation plan, chapter 14 of the general plan. Okay, not seeing any hands raised. Item number E4, Green Diamond Resource Company zone reclassification. All right, that one will be pulled. And item E5, General Plan and Housing Element Annual Progress Report. I'm not seeing anybody on Zoom, and I'm not seeing anybody in the room. Okay.
So then I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the consent agenda items number 1, 3, and 5 as proposed, to continue item 2 to a date uncertain, and to pull item 4.
The action on 2 is to continue, so that would be on consent. So
Yep, sorry. Okay, sorry, let me rephrase that. I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve consent agenda items 1, 2, 3, and 5, and to pull item 4.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? Okay. So I believe you just have a quick question on item number 4, correct? E4? If it's okay with the commission, then we'll go ahead and take that right now and take up E4 for consideration before getting into our public hearing items.
at this point, I'd like to step from the room. I have a conflict of interest.
Okay, we will come get you once we consider it. Commissioner Curiosity, would you like a full staff report or just a quick question or two?
No, thank you. Actually, I have just a question, not necessarily about this particular project, but
Oh, actually, I'm going to have you hold off for just one
thank
second.
you. Yep.
Please go ahead with your question.
Okay. So just to staff, I'm curious more of just about the process, the zone reclassification process in general, since they're rezoning to classifications that were approved already in the general plan update. I'm a little curious as to why the property owner has to apply to rezone to those classifications that were already approved in the GPU. Why wasn't it just done? And then whatever's existing is legally non-conforming if it doesn't conform to that zone.
Sure. So it is on the county's implementation plan to rezone all of the properties to be consistent with the general plan. That was our intention to have that done already, but it has not happened. And so to get ahead of that, property owners can apply, and that's what's happened in this case.
Perfect. That makes sense. That was my only question.
Okay. Well, I think with that, if there are no other questions, we could consider a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda item 4.
And I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on item E4. Let's go ahead and do a roll call vote for this one.
Commissioner Scavdall,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Commissioner Curiosity,
Yes.
Commissioner McFarland.
Yes.
We have a 4-0.
Thank you. And
Just to clarify, Commissioner Fulton abstained, is that, yeah, so it didn't show that on the screen.
oh, he didn't.
Oh, he didn't.
He recused himself.
That's not abstaining, got it, thank you.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and start pulling up the staff report for F1 while we bring Commissioner Fulton back. And whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Michael Kine with the Planning Department. I will be doing the presentation for a conditional use permit for an expansion of 20,000 square feet of outdoor cannabis. It is located in the Hydesville, Carlotta area at 6287 State Highway 36 in Carlotta, APN 206-331-028. The applicant is Irene Lee. The location of the property is in the Hydesville, Carlotta area on the 36. Due to its location, the applicant is also requesting a conditional use permit for cultivation within that community planning area and a conditional use permit for exemption from the 600-foot setback required for residents on separate owned parcels where residents are within that 600 feet in that community planning area. As you can see here is the site plan for the project. The darker green space towards the middle of the site plan will be where the new cultivation would go. And this is zoned agricultural exclusive. Currently, the project has 50,000 square feet of cultivation. 20,000 of it is mixed light cultivation. 30,000 of it is outdoor. And it has 5,000 square feet of propagation as well. The applicant is requesting another 20,000 square feet of outdoor cultivation and an expansion of 1,300 square feet for a nursery. Section 55.4.6.2.3.2 of the county code allows for up to an acre of cultivation with a special permit in this location. And due to county codes allowing up to 2 RRR sites, to move to this type of location, they were able to get a little extra as well, hence why they can apply up to 83,000 square feet, as long as they don't use more than 20% of the arable land for cultivation. In this case, it's under 10%, so it is feasible. All trimming and processing would be located off-site, done by a third party, and power is provided by PG&E. As we were able to discuss slightly at the last meeting, water use was a concern. The parcel is in the Eel River groundwater basin and is connected which is a connected and defined basin regulated under state law and administered by the Humboldt County Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which is done by Public Works. The proposal involves an annual water increase from what they previously had of approximately 864,000 gallons to 1.02 million gallons sourced from a permitted well. As you can see the math there, the numbers from 2025, and then we use those numbers to estimate what the new cultivation would be. So it would be just over 2 million, or just over 1 million gallons. This again kind of goes over the requirements for that location being in a community planning area and the requirements for setbacks of less than 600 feet from a nearest local resident. An exemption was granted under the previous cultivation permits in the past. At the past meeting on May 7th, you heard a neighbor who is adjacent to the property who was concerned about the smell and odors, as well as the water usage for increased pumping. The code states that because this parcel is located within a MAP community plan area, the applicant must demonstrate all areas of open air cultivation activities maintain setbacks of at least 600 feet or greater from any resident located on a separately owned parcel and are located within 600 feet or greater from the residentially zoned area except applicable to a community planning boundary. Or this cultivation must be in an enclosed structure with odor control measures or obtain approval for a conditional use permit permitting this. This next slide shows the approximate locations of the nearest residents to the new cultivation. You can see that 2 of the residences are within the 600 feet. Due to concerns expressed by neighbors, staff is recommending that the use permit for the exemption of the 600-foot standard setbacks be denied. Should the commission follow this recommendation, the proposed additional cultivation would be and should be approved, but not be required for any of the previously approved cultivation. One other public comment came in regarding this issue from a neighbor who had the same concerns. So this is basically the recommendation. It's technically not a recommendation because it's a code. It's part of the ordinance, but this would be what would be required of the applicant if you approve the cultivation. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission make all required findings for approval of PLN 18969 and adopt the resolution approving the PLN 969 CUP for expanded cultivation, approved the cultivation within the Hydesville-Carlotta Community Planning Area, and denied the exception of the 600-foot setback required for residences on separately owned parcels in the CPA. That concludes my presentation, and I'm here for any questions, and the agent for the project is here if you have any questions for him as well.
Thank you. Okay, let's bring it back to the commission for questions of staff.
Through the chair, I was curious, I wasn't able to find when the existing cultivation was approved. Do you have a history on when that occurred?
It would have been in 2021.
It was in 21, okay. And do you recall why, so I'm assuming the 600-foot setback condition was part of that, and they got a waiver, or they got
Correct.
a conditional use permit?
Yes.
And so I guess, I think the previous public commenter had said that they were in support of it during that time.
Correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Just another question. Absent the public comments that have come in as a part of this hearing, have there been any complaints about this project in the past?
In the past 4 years that I've been here, I have never received one. And looking at the past comments in Acela, there were none in the system that I had found.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions from the commission, so we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment. Traditionally we start with the applicant. They have up to 10 minutes to address the commission if they'd like to. If you'd like to address the commission, you're welcome to approach the podium.
Thanks so much, through the chair. Andy Powell here, agent for the applicant. I'm just gonna make this quick. I want to take a second to thank everybody in this whole process. I've been doing this for a minute or two, but want to thank Michael, Cliff, Director Ford, all you commissioners. This is a process, and although this isn't turning out the way the applicant wanted, we also want to thank the neighbors, because this public process gives us chances to be better neighbors. And I think one thing that gets missed in this whole process, I think, for the public, is to see that they do have a voice. They get to influence how we all work together as a community. So on behalf of the applicant, just wanted to thank everybody for this process, the hard work that's gone into it, and the neighbors that felt comfortable bringing up their concerns and issues, which we actually appreciate very much. That's all I got. Thank you guys for all your time.
Thank you. All right, at this time, any other members of the public that would like to address the commission on this matter, please approach the podium or raise your hand. I currently don't see any attendees on Zoom or by phone, and I'm not seeing anybody in the audience who is approaching the podium. So with that, do we have any questions for the applicant? Should I bring him back up at all? Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll bring it back to commission for deliberation.
I would, I'm just sort of was chewing over the odor complaints a bit more, and I read through the CCLUO EIR just to kind of get, or the odor portion, just to kind of get a better sense of where that 600-foot setback came from. And there was good context there because we wanted to try to maximize compliance and the ability for farmers to come into compliance, and also honor that outdoor grows, I think, are part of Humboldt County's brand. But I'm curious if community planning areas like this were sort of contemplated during the EIR process when coming up with the 600-foot setback, and if community planning areas maybe should be considered in the future as maybe requiring enclosed grow, or contemplating some kind of change there.
So little history here, if I could, through the chair.
Please.
So when we go back to 1.0, the community planning areas really were not contemplated. And cultivation was allowed in ag zones. One of the things that really wasn't envisioned is that there are many community planning areas that have ag general and ag exclusive zones in them. So that was placing cultivation in very close proximity to some residents. So this was absolutely a negotiated public process to address cultivation within community planning areas. This was the solution to that problem. And maybe it doesn't seem like enough right now, but really it's saying that if you're going to be within proximity to residents, you need to enclose. And unless, and there's a provision in the code, unless all of your neighbors, if you're pre-existing, well, for new cultivation, enclose, unless you can get a waiver.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I saw that, at least in the EIR, it was stating, kind of made the point of, where there is no objection to cannabis odor impacts. But it feels like a bit of a put it in and see if it's an impact.
That was for the existing, because one of the things the ordinance did, which is really rather unusual, is it looked back on existing approvals that were within community planning areas. And that's when the no objection provision came through. For new cultivation, I don't believe there's that. You've got to get a waiver from the commission as part of the action.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think, but I was trying to get more at like the intent. The history is really helpful, and I think the intent there is to recognize there's potential impact, but I'm wondering if at least the structure seems like we have amiable neighbors, they're supportive of their neighbors, they want to see this agricultural product, so we put it in and they say, oh, actually this really stinks, but now they're permitted, so now we're stuck. And I'm wondering if community planning areas, if we should revisit this allowance for, I guess.
It's really, really hard to completely take away entitlements. And so we have granted entitlements, even the 2.0 provision to look back at the ZCCs that were approved as part of 1.0 and give them, they had 3 options that they could go through to bring some compatibility with the residential areas that they may be adjacent to. I spent personally, when we were going through this from 1.0, a lot of time walking neighborhoods with people who just were so upset because their houses smelled like a skunk. And they were sending their kids to school and their kids smelled like a skunk. And it was like, I take good care of my kids. They're bathed, they're clothed, but I send them to school and kids are making fun of them because they smell. And so that really is the public interaction that resulted in the ordinance provisions like they are. So what you're being asked to do today is weigh whether or not you want to grant a waiver to the requirement that was put in place to protect those areas.
Yeah, I definitely understand that my discussion and questions are outside of what we're being we're allowed to, because I'm talking about the existing already permitted grow, but I think just going over this project kind of made me question if the way it's currently structured is effective for community planning areas. But I do hear you about the challenge of pulling back entitlements.
I can tell you the complaints have gone down dramatically since 2.0 was put in place. Every once in a while, a greenhouse will have a door or something that's propped open, and we'll get complaints, but that's an accident. One of the things that happens sometimes too, or has happened, you got to be careful about this, is that the greenhouses need to breathe. And so they will sometimes let air in and out. And then we'll get a rash of complaints. But people have really learned how to do that in such a way that the neighborhood doesn't get very upset.
I have kind of a tangent question, Director Ford. You said it's very difficult to remove entitlements, and I'm just wondering, is the bar to remove an entitlement proof of imminent threat to public health and safety? Or just curious what that bar is.
So the bar is it being a public nuisance, and that really is a very high bar. And when you grant an entitlement, and you're going to take that entitlement away when they're doing everything they're required to do, and now you're going to call it a public nuisance, I'm not going to speculate on the liability of that, but you know, you can kind of think for yourself what that might be if they're doing everything that they were conditioned to do, and you're going to pull that away.
So it's just like, it's a risk management decision for the county. It just in general, right? Like they do have the authority.
Generally, unless a permit
Through the
is.
chair.
Go ahead.
This is a legal question
Okay.
to entitlements, and what happens when you receive an entitlement is a vested property interest. And then when you take those property interests, you then implicate the U.S. Constitution that says you can't deprive life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And so there's a bunch of other legal questions associated with that. And then there's the California Constitution that has a very similar sort of phrase. But these are legal questions that we can resolve
Yeah, I was just curious.
off
But we-
the
yeah,
dais.
separate from this, okay.
Yes, if there, I'm happy to make a motion for this if there's no other discussion. I'm in favor of this, I'm including the staff's recommendation of denying the request for allowing open air.
I'm also in support of staff's recommendation.
Then I will move to, I'll read it. Adopt the resolution which finds we've considered the final EIR for the cannabis land use ordinance and its associated addendum for the Carlotta Gardens LLC project. Finds the proposed project complies with the general plan and zoning ordinance, denies the request for an exception to the requirement for fully enclosing the proposed cultivation, and approves the conditional use permit as recommended by staff.
I'll second.
I just want to acknowledge the applicant's comments about the process and willingness to do their best to be a good neighbor, work with the neighbors, and to accept the fact that their project changed a bit between what was on the consent calendar at our last meeting and what we're approving tonight. And quite frankly, I'm sure from the applicant's standpoint, changed significantly. In an effort to, to comply with the neighborhood concerns, or at least make an attempt to not make it worse, I'll say that, to the extent they can. So, and I appreciate that.
I'll also just, I think, still just put the thought out there of urging staff to consider whether or not that community planning areas are appropriate for allowing outdoor unenclosed at all. I mean, I know you have tons on your plate. It's not a formal request, I guess, but I still feel like I need to mention that if it makes sense to revisit that at some point.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. May we please get a voice vote?
Commissioner Scavdall,
Yes.
Commissioner Fulton, Commissioner McFarland,
Yes.
Commissioner Curriasi,
Yes.
Commissioner West.
Yes.
We have a 4-1 vote.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, that brings us to our next item, which is item F2. I see we have some new participants online, so I'm just going to start off this item by noting that if you would like to participate during public comment, when you hear me open up the public comment, please raise your hand. There's a little bit of a lag on the video sometimes, so once we get to public comment, if you want to speak, please raise your hand so I make sure that I see you and make sure we get your comment in. So staff will pull up the report. This is mixed residential density ordinance, enabling higher densities within housing opportunity zones if compliant with development standards. And staff, whenever you're ready.
Just getting connected to the network here so I can get on Zoom. All right, thank you all for your patience. So, as mentioned minutes ago, we're presenting on the mixed housing ordinance today. Let me through. So these changes are in accordance with Housing Element Implementation Measure number 61, which directs us to establish a mixed housing zoning district. Specifically, the wording of it is amending the zoning regulations to add a principal zoning district to be applied within housing opportunity zones that allow higher residential densities and flexible zoning configurations to address workforce housing needs. It's not exactly the way we're going about this, but this will meet the intent. Why are we doing this? The Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, has highlighted this implementation measure as one of the projects in our housing element they'd like us to prioritize This ordinance is a means that we've determined would effectively and smoothly fulfill H-IM 61. What this is going to do is create an opportunity in areas where affordable housing is needed, but would tend not to be developed otherwise. So what this is going to do and where it's going to affect is treat the housing opportunity zones as a combining zone-like layer, adding options to R1 and R2 zones, which permit single-family residential and two-family residential respectively, both of which typically result in suburban settings. And the housing opportunity zones are exclusively inland, so this would affect Redway, Garberville, Miranda, Wiat, Scotia, McKinleyville, and the neighborhoods surrounding Eureka. So when this applies is in the areas described. If you're building more dense housing structures on R1 and R2 than would normally be permitted, that's when you would be aligning yourself with this code. This does not apply to any uses that could be permitted otherwise. For example, since R2 principally permits duplexes, this code would not apply those development standards to duplexes in R2 zones. What this is going to do is principally permit duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and apartments comprised of 5 dwelling units or other configurations thereof, as long as you're complying with the development standards that we'll get into a little bit. Plus, it adds a conditionally permitted use for apartments comprised of 6 or more dwelling units altogether. Just as a visualization, we're trying to codify a means to allow for housing configurations that are more towards the left side of this image. We can ignore the live, work, and stacked triplexes and mid-rise buildings on the right side. That's not what this is going to be going for, and it's not going to be appropriate where they're going to go. Another aspect of this is it increases the density to 25 units per acre, and it shall not be construed to reduce any existing maximum densities. So if you've somehow got a higher land use density than 25 on your property, you would be going with that higher one instead. It also raises the maximum ground coverage for these units to 45%, up from 35%. And we can compare the density to the residential low-density land use, where most of this is coming from, which is 1 to 8 units per acre, otherwise interpretable as 1 unit per 5,400 square feet. Another comparable density is from the residential medium density land use, which is 7 to 30 units per acre based on what the general plan use maps say. Couple of related codes to go through. First, we've got parking. The current standard under most conditions is going to be 1 space per bedroom. But this proposed code instead requires 1 space per unit for any structure with 4 or more units. Plus, we've got an alternative in the proposal to add a caveat for structures that have 6 or more units when they're within half a mile of an active bus stop, in which you would instead require 1 space per 2 units instead. In any circumstance, if the parking code would require fewer spaces than this would, then that lower requirement would apply. On a different topic entirely, no short-term rentals are allowed in these. We're going with something similar to the ADU ordinance, in which there's a 30-day minimum rental term. The density bonus ordinance is somewhat linked to this because you can develop a number of units. Typically, the density bonus ordinance would only be applied when the maximum density is reached. but we would like to further incentivize target unit development. So we would allow more than 5 dwelling units per structure without a conditional use permit, without requiring that maximum density to be met, as long as you're complying with the density bonus percentage tables. And if you're including the target units, then additional units per structure are allowed, and those additional units all need to be evenly divided among the structures. Incentives tied into with density bonuses can modify the development standards, one standard per incentive, and this code does not grant any additional incentives. So some of the development standards are dependent on the underlying zoning. Setbacks, for example, mostly dependent on the zoning, but we're adding a 10-foot setback from any other structures, both on and off the property. With structures off the property, that side of things isn't going to matter too much because the minimum setback from the property line is going to be 5 feet, and that's on both sides. However, if you're going up to a 3rd story or somehow higher, then it's an additional 5 feet of setback per story. Excuse me. Also, with height, we're mostly complying with the development standards, which are of 35 feet. But when you're within 20 feet of an existing single-family residence, you can't exceed that single-family residence's height by 15 feet, pretty much just giving you 1 extra floor plus some room for a roof. If you're next to a single-story, single-family residence, then you got 2 stories pretty easily, and you can fit most of what you're going to need with that. With walkways, we do require pathing between units, sidewalks, and driveways, all to be hard surface. And then we've got open space requirements in which 10% of the property area should be consolidated into shared open space, and that open space shall not be separated into more than 2 areas per 3 structures. Just to ensure that there's an appropriate minimum space per unit, there's a minimum of 100 square feet of total open space, whether that's shared or private combined, per unit. Recreational areas with a required minimum of 500 square feet kind of count twice towards that 10%. And your required square footage then gets halved if you're within a quarter mile of a park. Just to visualize what open space could look like, this isn't to scale, so it's not too pretty. We've got 3 structures on the parcel on the left, each comprised of several dwelling units, 2 structures on the center parcel, and 1 4-unit structure on the parcel on the right. Just to take a look at how those open spaces can be aligned all in green. That's what would be counted towards your 10%. Like I said, this isn't to scale, so it's much more than 10% in this visualization. But you can see that the parcel with 3 structures on it can count both sides of the open space, whereas the other 2 only get 1. You can align the structures to the back of the property to kind of maximize that usage. And here another visualization. This is an image taken from a suburb that's completely outside of the county. I just want you to consider for a moment how many units you think each of those 3 structures has. And it turns out that we've got 4 units, and then 2 units. That surprised me when I was looking at them. It kind of shows that structures that can support multifamily can reasonably fit in well with within a suburban area. Excuse me. All right, here's some visualizations of the areas where these are mapped out. It's kind of hard to see the housing opportunity zones on all of these. It is the kind of greenish diagonal polygons with the thick border, and then the R1s are all marked in yellow. R2s, R3s, and R4s are all marked in orange, so it's a little bit hard to tell between them, but there's Redway and Garberville. Here is Miranda, Wiot, and Scotia. Then we've got Pine Hill, Humboldt Hill, and McKinleyville, then Cutton, Myrtletown, and Ridgewood Heights. We were requested to provide mapping showing the urban census designated areas. Those only are found in McKinleyville and Eureka, as at least insofar where they overlap with housing opportunity zones. And in just a moment, I will show you the R1 and R2 overlaid over that, just so you can kind of visualize how even this is spread. We've gotten some comments that we'd like to respond to. One comment suggested that we split the proposed code between census-designated urban areas and defining everything else as rural. So this ordinance applies to R1 and R2 zones. Since such zones will result in suburban areas regardless of census designation, increasing density in suburban areas is infill development and combats sprawl. Another comment suggested that the development standards are a barrier to urban multifamily development. The proposed code's required to match community character. One of the standards that were referenced in this comment is the maximum ground coverage, where, as mentioned before, this is an increase from 35%. It mentioned the required screening, but that's only 1 tree per 30 feet and a fence. And the height limitation was also called out. Again, effectively 1 story plus roofing above neighboring residences within 20 feet. None of these standards should prevent the creative development of multifamily structures over those of single-family structures. Plus, this isn't really intended to compete with multifamily development. Additionally, it was suggested that we eliminate parking mandates in housing opportunity zones, but parking should be really considered carefully based on projected needs. And this ordinance isn't an appropriate opportunity for that kind of sweeping change. These units aren't on a nexus of transportation corridors, so cars are very likely to be needed. Another portion of the comments recommended that 6 or more units should be allowed by right in urban housing opportunity zones rather than with a conditional use permit. But depending on the density, 6 or more units are allowed in all affected areas by this ordinance, just not 6 or more units per structure without a CUP or a density bonus. Such structures are unlikely to be appropriate adjacent to single-family residences anyways. We've also been asked about Measure T1 from the RCAP and how that might be relevant here. Since Measure T1 focuses on interconnectivity of active transportation networks, its considerations are relevant primarily along corridors, which tend to be commercial, industrial, or multifamily, not the R1 and R2 zones. And we were also asked, does the proposed ordinance meet the midpoint densities described in the housing element? Since the midpoint densities are specific to individual parcels in the residential land inventory and were calculated based on the general plan land use density, since this raises the density and every circumstance, there's no circumstance in which the proposed ordinance would lower a project site's permissible density. Staff recommends that y'all adopt the resolution, making the required findings, recommending a specific alternative for the parking element of the code, and recommending the board adopt the mixed residential density ordinance. This concludes my presentation, and staff is available for any questions that y'all have.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner
I
Fulton.
have a couple comments or questions, I guess. Being from Southern Humboldt, in some of these areas that you have proposed, the streets are narrow, they're limited on sidewalks, and therefore parking is very limited to the single-family dwellings. And if your parking is going to allow one car parking space per structure, and there are multiple people living in these buildings, so you're shoving all those cars on the street where the parking is already limited in front of people's houses. So they're going to be competing for parking spots in an area where parking sidewalks are already at a prime, if any. Most Southern Humboldt residential areas don't have sidewalks or streets wide enough for even, a lot of the streets aren't even wide enough for street-sized parking, especially on both sides of the road. So how is that going to be addressed in this?
I think while we are proposing to, in some circumstances, reduce parking, we're not really supporting elimination of parking, because particularly in Southern Humboldt, but also in the locations of most of these R1 and R2 districts, they're not in proximity to where people work, or they may be, but typically not. And so people will drive. And so while one day we would like to see everybody ride their bike, take the bus, use alternative forms of transportation, we're not quite there yet. And so we're trying to be careful about that. And if we miss the mark in terms of the reduction that we're proposing, that's certainly a decision the Planning Commission can make to modify that or hold to existing parking requirements. We're not opposed to that, but we're trying to create a balance between your concern, which is to protect the community character, the neighborhood character, but also to achieve the general plan objective of finding ways to provide housing that's affordable to workforce people. And so there's a balance in there someplace.
I would agree that there's a balance there, but I don't think this is the balance. I really don't think the parking situation, at least in the Southern Humboldt area, I can't speak for Myrtlewood and those other areas that you mentioned. I really think the cart is in front of the horse on this one, as far as those areas go.
Commissioner McFarland, and then
I guess this is the fun in having such a geographically distinct county, but, and I normally side with you, Commissioner Fulton, but on this one, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum. I've lived in an apartment without parking before. I figured it out. I also, in my current neighborhood, I have multiple neighbors who do not drive for various mobility, age, various reasons. And so I think having the ability to rent an apartment or a duplex, or, some sort of housing, there is a subset of the population that would utilize that without parking. I also think we're not saying you can't add parking. We're saying it's up to the developer how much they want to add. So the developer could make the market decision in this area. Do I think I would be able to sell or rent a property without parking, or vice versa? So if anything, I would support alternative 2 or even a potential further reduction.
I'm going to ask that we put a pin in the discussion point. I think we're going to have a robust discussion around parking, but I want to make sure we get through questions and then public comment and then bring it back. But I will bring it back to you. Do you have questions, or do you want to get in on the discussion after we do public comment?
Yeah, I'll hold my comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kuriasi.
Thank you. Can you go over again how you came up with the 5-unit threshold? I think you had some, you talked about it a little bit. Can you go over that again?
Well, that's a creative decision. One element that Housing and Community Development it kind of wants of us is to allow for more than 5 units per, not more, at least 5 units per parcel. However, we may be able to permit it. In this case, my gut says 4 is probably best. But to kind of allow for that wiggle room, some element of reasonable, one additional unit of options felt appropriate, just to be diplomatic in that.
I saw Commissioner Farland and then Commissioner Fulton.
Okay, this one's a clarifying question, not an opinion. When you said that the units need to be divided equally among structures if they go beyond the density bonus, and I was just wondering why.
That's just so that we don't get like one structure that's 3 units and another structure that's 10 units somehow. And it's not beyond the density bonus, it's part of the density bonus. If you're getting a density bonus, those units get distributed. Does that help?
Partially, yes, but why would, if the site supports it, why would you not want unequal distribution of units? Like a building in the front, it's a triangular shaped lot. A building in the front has 3 units, a building in the back has 7.
Maybe that would be appropriate in some circumstances. That would probably result in wanting a CUP. We could consider that. Maybe, I'm not sure whether the code as written would allow for that, but it may, and you may consider adding an additional option for that. But this is about matching community character, so we want to ensure that all the visible houses with neighbors are matching in scale.
Commissioner Fulton?
And I just have a clarifying question. You kind of zipped through the map there really quick, and I didn't get a good glimpse of the southern Humboldt area. But in those areas where you're proposing these changes, were any of those areas impacted by the '64 flood?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last portion of that?
And the other areas of southern Humboldt where this planning change is suggested, were any of those areas impacted during the 1964 flood? And would that have bearing on these type of developments?
I'm not sure that would have bearing in this because we can't permit these without meeting the flood restrictions.
Commissioner Curiosity.
Yeah, can you, or in the R1 and R2 zones, as they're currently written, are there height limits for?
Yeah, 35 feet.
It's 35 feet, okay. I guess following up on that, do we still, is there also a similar, if it's more than 15 feet, you can't go 15 feet above your neighbor?
No.
Exactly.
In this, yes, but not currently in the R1
Yeah,
and R2.
not in our
Right.
current code, but in this code.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing the midpoint density part, but I think maybe I'm misunderstanding midpoint density a bit, or it sounds like I might be. I was under the impression that midpoint density took into consideration all of the parcels within the housing opportunity zone, and then you had to make sure that whatever we're coming up with is at least meets that, if not exceeds it. And so
So the midpoint density is something that is used to demonstrate the number of units that can be built within an area. So by going well above what that midpoint density would be, which is what this does, we are not violating that. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that from a midpoint density standpoint versus going from a maximum of 8 units per acre to 25 units per acre, this is encouraging far higher density.
I think I'm just curious, what is the midpoint density? Is it 8 per acre
It
in
depends-
R1 and R2?
It depends on the area.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of my point. Like, so you've already gone through and confirmed that 25 units per acre is not lower than the midpoint density for the different areas that we're looking at.
Right, yeah, it'll never approach that.
Okay, so yeah, I think I was hoping to see an actual table of what those midpoint densities are, but that's
Well, if you
okay.
took the land use, maximum land use of low-density residential, 8 units per acre, midpoint density would be 4.
I see. Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out, is how do we arrive at that number? What is the midpoint density?
Yeah,
I see.
and frankly, then when you start to develop things at a certain density, the thing that you start to see is that Mr. Grishel used a 5,400 square foot lot, but that's including the street. So that's really tight.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions for staff at this time, so we'll go ahead and open up public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment and you are online, please raise your hand, and I'm going to take it to the room and see if anybody in the room would like to make a comment. I'm not seeing anybody in the room. If you are online and you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand now. I'm going to give just a minute because we do have some folks online in case they want to raise their hand and we have a lag. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand, so I think we will take it back to the commission. Discussion?
Respectfully, I think there's areas that are prepared for this. I am in agreement with Commissioner McFarland that there is a need for this in certain areas. I just don't particularly think that some of these areas within the southern Humboldt region have the infrastructure and or are ready for this type of development. I think if this was split between our urban areas, have an urban one and a rural one that is able to address those concerns in our rural areas, and I put Weot, Myers Flat, Miranda, Phillipsville, all those areas in the rural areas. I just don't know that the infrastructure is there. The streets aren't wide enough. There's no sidewalks. Parking is a premium. But I think it is a necessity. We will need it eventually. But I would like to see the infrastructure in place before we implement something like this in those rural areas. And maybe the areas around Eureka, Arcata, and McKinleyville are better prepared for this type of stuff.
Can we do that? Can we split it?
So I just want to remind you, the general plan housing element says housing opportunity zones. That's all we've done, is trying to go along with what the adopted housing element, the housing element that's been accepted by HCD. This is an implementation measure to carry that out. So I don't want to be defensive, but I want to say, before you start carving stuff out, understand that this is really about trying to provide housing that's affordable to workforce people throughout the county in places where that housing normally wouldn't be found. And these are largely areas, don't disagree that utilities are important, that transportation is important, that it's all got to be there. But these are largely areas that are within CSDs. They have utility hookups, they have presumably power, and that we know what that is. And yes, the streets may be narrow, but a lot of the planning thought at the current time is narrow streets and residential areas are better because it slows traffic down. So I mean, you can absolutely carve areas out. But the thing that I just want to caution you before you start carving stuff out is that what we're trying to do is do something we said we were going to do in the housing element to provide sufficient housing throughout Humboldt County. And it may be that some utility districts, some CSDs, are struggling a little bit, but I mean, when you look at the number of infill lots that are actually going to be affected by this, that's relatively small also. This is not having large-scale expanses of new development.
Commissioner Scapel, you've been waiting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree that we need this housing, and but I also recognize that we're going to add multifamily housing into single-family residential neighborhoods. Okay? And when we do that, the public that's not here today will be right there, and it'll be no different than allowing a cannabis farm in a community zone that we just dealt with tonight earlier. Okay, and we find ourselves in these situations where it's easy to adopt these regulations and put all these conditions on here, and then when reality hits us and somebody actually proposes to develop apartment with multiple units and no parking in a residential neighborhood that's going to push that parking onto the streets and out into the neighborhood, we're going to hear from everybody, and we're going to go, oh, well, how do we do this? And so I share that concern, and very personal experience. I have my own, one of my children lives in apartment unit that is workforce housing. He works in the trades. People in the trades have a company work truck and a personal vehicle. And when they can't park it in their parking lot because the new apartment next door that was built with no parking overflows into their spaces, he has to park his work truck on the street, and get broken into, and his tools get stolen. So those are real world problems. So is the fact that, we want to encourage people to use other transportation and everybody have a car. And, but I think most developers are going to try to develop their housing for the lowest cost and try to keep the rents down. And if we say they don't need to have parking, they're not going to put in parking. It's not going to be voluntarily, I'll develop this apartment complex and add extra parking. It's not going to happen. So how do we have the flexibility? How do we give ourselves some flexibility to when, and I think this is the point people are getting, when these are in an area where there's broad wide streets, there is on-street parking, there are bus stops, there is public transport, they're close to the university or where people work or whatever, we have less parking. But maybe when they're on a narrow street in a tight cul-de-sac where there's no place for people to park, we have the flexibility to say, wait a minute, you have to put some on-site parking. I guess I want my cake and eat it too, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, Chair, if I could just talk about that for a little bit, because it is a struggle. I mean, we agree it's a struggle. And we're, the focus of tonight is to look at this and see if the balance has been achieved and where that balance is. The other thing that we're called upon to do by Housing and Community Development is to remove restrictions to development, which is, as you know, is discretion.
Yeah.
So if, if the commission's opinion is we want to see the, make sure there's sufficient parking in the worst possible circumstance, maintain some level of adequate parking. I don't disagree with that. If the more discretion you work into this, the more hurdles there will be to get development approved. So I would just offer you that as you think about this, that, if we really want to create housing with low barrier permitting, making it really simple, no decisions need to be made. If you want to see the parking there, require the parking. I mean, that's going to be the balance that is before you tonight.
Can I follow up? When these parking requirements that we're talking about in here now, one space per unit, those are not counting on-street parking, like if there's frontage?
Correct. Those are all on parcel parking.
Okay.
If I may ask real quick, what's the, are these 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, or is it up to the developer's discretion?
In essence, it's up to developers' discretion. However, in practice, the kind of results of this density is going to probably be 1-bedroom, like studios to 1-bedroom.
Thank you.
Commissioner McFarland, and then
You said it was one spot in previous order, one spot per bedroom. So does that mean this, you could have a development with 3 1-bedrooms and a studio and only require 3, or is it per unit?
That's the existing code?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the existing code. It's not this.
Okay, gotcha.
Commissioner Curriasi.
Well, I think I'm kind of aligned here with Commissioners Scavdall and Fulton, but I think for very different reasons. I think the concern I have is the housing opportunity zone locations themselves, and that we're proposing infill in these particular locations. I tried to dig into the process of how the general plan process came about with how the housing opportunity zones were defined in the first place. And it wasn't particularly successful, but I think the intent really is that you're seeing communities develop here, and so you want to encourage infill in places where there's sort of a defined community, and such as Wiat or Miranda. And then the sort of the EIR, I think, sort of partially or justifies that through saying if you put infill in communities, then you're reducing the number of vehicle trips, because then they potentially have access to services and amenities in those communities. The challenge I see here is that a lot of these locations, particularly in southern Humboldt, are simply bedroom communities. The amount of amenities that exist is actually quite low. And so I think for me, the way I see this playing out is that a lot of these areas will need cars to go to work, to buy groceries, to do all of those the things we have to do every day. And so I've also, when reviewing this, was starting to lean towards this, can we divide this up somehow? However, I think, recognizing that, as Director Ford was saying, the general plan's gone through this already. We've entertained the process of where we're defining these housing opportunity zones. And is this really the place that we dig all of that up? And so I think and then in addition, we bring in the recently adopted Regional Climate Action Plan, the RCAP, and the particularly measure T1E requests establishing standards for when and how multifamily developments how they shall provide interconnected bike and ped facilities. And again, that intent is we're infilling in places where that bike and ped facilities make sense versus Miranda or Wiat, which are fantastic communities, but they're bedroom communities. We're not going to see Murphy's go into Miranda, most likely.
If I could, I agree with what you're saying, but I would draw a distinction for this. While it does very much seem like this is multifamily residential, this is not an R3 or an R4 zone. This is not a commercial district where we allow residential up to 30 units per acre by right, because we just adopted that. So we've already put in place that what hopefully will be very intense development along corridors. One of the things that hopefully this does, and maybe the opportunity zones are entirely misplaced, but you're right, they were set up already. And the housing element said do this here, and so we're trying to do this now. And maybe all that's misguided. But I think what this does is provide an opportunity for developers who don't do big multifamily to do 3 to 5 units or 3 to 10 units in multiple structures at a time on parcels where that makes sense. And that does create new housing opportunities. And so much of what we're doing to try to implement the housing element, the last housing element that we adopted in cycle 6, before we get into cycle 7, which we're working on right now, is really to create opportunities. This is just a different opportunity to create housing.
Yeah, I think I understand that. I think maybe to clarify what I'm struggling with is how we're justifying, is our justification, particularly in the transportation side, in the EIR addendum. And I think that we're just simply saying trips will be reduced because we're infilling in areas where there are amenities, and I just think that's simply not true.
Well, if you're not satisfied with that, we can definitely take a look at that. I completely understand your concern with that. And, we can take the language there probably needs to be clarified anyway.
Commissioner Scavdall.
Just speaking to that concern, and I appreciate the concern, but I think it's one that the market's going to more sort out than the community development area. So I just don't see a lot of a significant number of multiple unit housing complexes going into the residential areas in some of those neighborhoods that we're describing. However, I do note that, we're proposing a hospital in Garberville, and there's likely going to be a need for workforce housing. So there's an example where perhaps it would go into some of those neighborhoods in Garberville or Redway. I want to come back to the parking. Maybe I'm trying to come up with a solution to the dilemma that I proposed. And I guess I would be more comfortable if we were talking about a development where there is street frontage. So if there's one parking space per 2-bedroom unit, I think is what we're proposing right now, off-site. But if there was, let's just say, for example, a half space per unit on-street parking, that would mean that a type of a development that had a reasonable amount of street frontage, so maybe a long, narrow lot, could take advantage of that street frontage parking. But if somebody were to develop multiple units, let's say in a cul-de-sac where there is no street frontage parking, they would have to develop more parking on site. Does that make sense?
So what I'm hearing you say is establish a parking requirement and then allow a certain amount of that to be calculated by, say, what I heard you say was a half space on street.
On street. Give them credit for on-street parking.
Yeah.
And I know,
And just to clarify, so that half space, that would be a full space,
it would be a full space, I'm just saying,
but you get credit for half of
you
what
know,
that
one and a
represents.
half spaces per two-bedroom unit.
Yeah,
versus-
yeah.
That's all I'm saying, right? So I don't want to create too much parking, but I don't want to put a burden out in the neighborhood, and I'm worried about these spaces. And I'm more concerned about the parking, quite frankly, in the more suburban areas. To me, in the rural areas, in my experience, and I've lived both very urban in the Bay Area and very rural, the rural areas tend to be larger lots, and people, quite frankly, park on their property. Whether there's a sidewalk or driveway, or it doesn't really matter. They find parking. So I'm not quite as concerned out in those neighborhoods. I'm more concerned about the denser urban areas where we're going to be perhaps pushing parking over onto the current neighbor that has a single-family home with street frontage, and they like to have they like to have nobody parking in front of their house because they want it for their guests or whatever, that we're going to fill that up. And people aren't going to be happy about it. But that's what I'm trying to avoid.
Okay.
Not that there's a, you know, again, if it were Bay Area, those spaces don't belong to you and people park in them. But up here, people feel some sort of ownership to that space.
To your last point, I think I really hesitate to count on street parking for any. It is public parking, and as much as people have feelings about it, I really firmly believe that it is public parking that is available for anyone. And if you want more parking for your guests, you have to put it on your own property.
I don't disagree. It is public parking for anybody. But if you're letting the neighbor develop without parking on there, then you're, quite frankly, dedicating that public parking for anybody to those units. And I don't think that's fair.
I hear that. I don't agree
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
I hear that. And I appreciate you trying to find a compromise in there. I think where I stand, I think how it's written is, for me, a pretty good compromise between desire, I think, to support more certainty for builders and take as many barriers away as possible to develop housing. And it does have a little bit more parking required than we've seen in other places, but I do think, to everybody else's points, that for me it's appropriate given where we're talking about, but I don't think I can support raising the parking requirements any further. Commissioner Curriasi.
Is there interest, kind of started off with the idea of sort of splitting into rural and urban? Do we want to go down that road? On the one hand, I started doing that already during my review process, but on the flip side, it starts to complicate things. And
I think after listening to the discussion a little bit more, I'm you know, thinking back to a time when I did live in a neighborhood that had every third house was a duplex, and that meant that by default, the duplex was using the public street parking as dedicated parking for residents, and that is how it worked out. Like, even though it was public, it was how it worked out. And so I guess on thinking it a little bit more, I would be okay with sticking with what is proposed. I don't think that I would push for reducing the parking requirement further. Which is how I was originally leaning more a little bit towards alternative 2 or maybe even further. But if we're not gonna do the split, then I think I would stick with it as it is.
Commissioner Fulton.
Yes, after listening to Director Ford's comments in regards to splitting, I'm not so sure that that's the appropriate thing to do after listening to Commissioner Skapdal's comments in regards to Garberville. I mean, because then because Garberville is set up a little bit better. It's more of I know there's a lot of vacant lots that would support this type of operation, but I'm also torn between the communities of Weot and some of the communities in Miranda. I mean, I'm fully in support of what we're trying to accomplish here, but I think there needs to be some forethought in regards to approving some of these things in specific areas. I think they really need to think these through, as opposed to having a developer come in and say, why are you telling me I can't do it? This thing says I can. And we know by looking at the streets, it's a single lane already. And in regards to parking, you tell somebody that's been parking in front of their house for 30 years that that's no longer their parking spot, and see where that gets you. I know that I grew up in a residential area. The street was not ours, but that's where we parked the second or third car. That's just, the entire neighborhood was set up that way. You move an apartment complex in there and you start shoving people from parking where they have been parking for years, it's gonna cause a lot of problem. We're gonna have a whole bunch of people at that podium. There has to be, and I get it, it's public. I understand that and I agree with you, but we have to come to some sort of medium here as to how we can address all these situations. I just don't know that it's appropriate for every situation in your map. I think it's appropriate for a county and appropriate for lots of locations, but it's not appropriate for every situation on your map.
I think, even though I'm probably perceived as a city person, I would agree Garberville. I would think that actually this is more appropriate for Garberville, and that I did not flag Garberville as a place where I thought this shouldn't happen, because you have grocery stores, you have stores, you have coffee shops, you have work opportunities there. Whereas, for example, the Ridgewood area, even though that's close to Eureka, I don't think it's appropriate. There's no way you can walk or bike or have an alternative way to get to amenities in Cutner or in Eureka from the Ridgewood Heights area. So maybe there's potential for agreement there. And then second, I think to your comment around the parking in front of their house on a public street, I just want to remind that that's not an entitlement. So we don't have a way. I don't think it's, we can hear all the public comment we want and the gripe, but it's not an entitlement. So.
I'm also struggling with the one size fits all of this this is not the first time we've had a struggle where our county is very varied. It's quite large, and it's hard to develop policies that fit everything. And I also understand where Director Ford is coming from in trying to meet the demands of the state, which are numerous and continuing to grow.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if you were to try to divide this and create different maybe standards, is there a way to get there that it does allow the mixed use in all the housing opportunity zones, but what is it about the more rural areas that you don't like because they're going to drive? I mean, I don't know that we could ever overcome that. But if it's about the narrowness of the streets, we often put in a requirement for street width into ordinances as locations where they become controlling factors. And so I just am curious if there's a way to make that division without saying here but not here.
Commissioner Curriasi?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm not focusing on the will people drive or not. I agree that that's way too vague and challenging. I guess my approach is from the EIR justification, arguing that there is no increase in trips. And so I think my thought is to look at maybe take guidance from how the RCAP approached that, and they used the terms economic hubs or amenities. And so for me, I think you can reasonably argue there are economic hubs and amenities in Garberville. You could possibly argue that in Redway. Can you argue that in Wiyot or Miranda? I don't think so. I don't think you could argue it in Humboldt Hill. So that's one concept.
So I would caution that we're trying to mix objectives at that point. And I would also offer that I think I would propose to change the addendum to say that the EIR evaluated cumulative traffic impacts, and there weren't intersections that would be affected by this that would be triggered to anything below an LOSC. Level of service.
In just a comment, I think the level of services will rise if the populace rises. If there's more housing and more people move into these areas, then there will be more services that will follow.
Yeah.
As far as amenities like a grocery store or even a small outlet, like in Wiyot, there's not a store anymore, but if the populace goes up and the demand is there, then there's a potential for those amenities to arise.
I think we just earlier kind of argued that we're not going to see significant development in these areas. I mean, we're going to see population increase of 10 or 20.
Actually, if I could jump in there, the population in the rural areas is going down rapidly. Okay. HCD has lost their mind with how much housing they're asking us to build, because housing demand won't go up until we have jobs. Without jobs, there's no reason for people to stay here. Without jobs, there's no reason for people to build this housing. And so it's a vicious cycle that we're in right now. And I don't want to say that don't worry about it, because what you're struggling with is what you should be struggling with. But I think that at some level that there should be some, well, I would just encourage you to recognize what we're confronted with, which is, this is a horrible thing to say, but is to satisfy a paper requirement. And this really, if you want us to go and look and do an inventory within the housing opportunity zones of how many lots this really would involve, I mean, we can do that, because I don't think it's going to be a huge number. And then, if there's areas where the streets are too narrow and we need to create a requirement to have a certain street width so that we're not creating safety problems, we can absolutely look at doing that. But I would ask you to focus on the objective here, which is really to create housing throughout the entire county for workforce people, and it's not related to the RCAP. I know you want to tie it into the RCAP, but the RCAP is looking at multifamily residential at a far different scale than what's being proposed here. These are lots that are like 10,000 square feet or less. They're not big.
I saw Commissioner McFarland and then Commissioner Scavdall.
I don't know if this is doable, but could we, let's say we adopted it as proposed tonight, but could we put a time extension on it and say, or time limit and say, so that way we can see if any of, all of our concerns are justified, see how many people actually apply to develop, and so in X amount of years, we can choose to change it and just, I mean, if population's going down and we think we're not even gonna get development applications, then we're sort of discussing nothing, but, so, I don't know, I just, if we can put a time qualifier on it and see how it plays out and see if the county's economic future gets brighter or not.
Commissioner Scavdall.
I'll just say, I think we need this, so I'm definitely in support. And I struggle every time with, we have such diversity in Humboldt County, I struggle every time with trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all ordinance. I think staff has done a pretty good job at that. I've shared my concern. I wish there was some flexibility regarding these going in neighborhoods where I'll say there's lots of on-street public parking available versus where they're going on in neighborhoods where there's no on-street public parking available. I would like to see more flexibility for staff to be able to ask the developer to, in some of those situations, to put in more on-site parking. But, I mean, I'm not going to follow my sword on that one because I think overall it's a good ordinance, and staff has probably been wrestling with the same issues that we're talking about, and knowing that some of us on this commission would like to see more parking, and some of us on this commission would like to see less parking, and I think you've probably done a pretty good compromise already. So I guess I'm saying I'm willing to support the ordinance as written with, I think it was the first parking option.
Alternative one.
Yes.
Would you want to do sort of like a trial period that allows us to come back in however many years and decide, do we need to carve this out more?
I think we can always do that. I don't think we need a trial
Okay.
period. I think if something's not working, staff can come to us and say, hey, you know what, we adopted this ordinance and this part doesn't work that well, and we need to amend it.
Commissioner Curriasi.
I think I'm still, I heard Director Ford suggest adding language to the EIR addendum, saying that level of service would not drop below level C. I definitely appreciate staff's interest in trying to reword the addendum language. I think I'm still just fundamentally struggling. I don't agree that the RCAP doesn't apply here. I think RCAP wasn't just talking about very large multifamily. At least that's not how I read it. But
No, the RCAP was talking about transit corridors and developing around transit corridors. This is the housing element that wants us to create housing options beyond everything else that we're doing. And we committed to HCD that we would do this. I mean, I don't want to keep banging that drum too loudly, but this is a commitment that was made when the housing element was adopted. So I think that rather than going around and rezoning properties, that's the other thing you could do is say, you know what? We don't want it to happen in all housing opportunity zones. We want you to tell us where you're going to rezone this. And that could be done. But I think the thing that the genius of this is that it doesn't require us to pinpoint things in specific areas. It allows a more ubiquitous approach. It allows that housing in other areas. I really would advocate or encourage you or to think about the fact that this if we wanted to be strict about the RCAP, we wouldn't allow housing anywhere outside the transit corridors. And that's not the objective. The objective is to create greater opportunities for transit to be effective so that people have alternatives to their vehicles.
I guess I don't read the RCAP as strictly limited to transit corridors.
But the T1 that we keep talking about, that's what that was focused around, was because there's existing transit corridors and wanting to develop, it goes back to the BART model in the Bay Area, where there were stations that were built. And that development then started building up around those stations, because then people could walk to the transit stop, get on the train to Oakland or San Francisco, and get out and walk to their place of business without ever getting in a car. That
I hear you. I think we're just going to disagree here. I think the intent, what the RCAP is trying to capture is that we need to be more thoughtful about where we're doing infill, and I think there's still guidance there, even if it's not specifically measured T1. I was referring to that just in terms of why it talks about the fact that it talks about economic hubs and amenities. And so I'm coming from, do we really want infill? And so and I struggle here, and I struggle with like, well, we're not actually going to see it, we're trying to check the box with HCD, and I understand that the position that staff is in, but I think I also want to be cognizant of we're setting a precedent, and we're making a public justification of why we're saying this, why we're approving this. So I'm just unfortunately leaning a little bit towards no on this, and I also struggle with the LOS of C, even though the GPU EIR still used LOS at the time. I think I struggle with accepting the continued use of LOS as a justification.
I only referred to that because that is the analysis in the GPUs.
I know.
So you can't do an addendum to something else.
Yep, I know. I hear you. Chewing on it a bit more here. I'm chewing on this a bit more here. Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner McFarland?
I have an easy one while he chews on it. I think in the CEQA addendum, there's a typo in assumption 1. It's like page 3, the first bullet. I don't know if that, really matters.
We'll correct that.
Okay.
Page 3.
It's like the first bullet in assumption 1. I think you're just missing the word more.
This is the word more.
More.
If I could, I just want to respond to something Commissioner Curiosity said. Well, the GPU EIR did focus on LOS. It is the one that looked ahead and saw that we're going to VMT, and it did begin to contemplate those things, and some of the things that this commission has approved along the way are very much related to that.
I have a couple of smaller comments similar to Commissioner McFarland while I sort of contemplate what my final vote will be. If that's okay. One is, so in section 6.5.6, it gives examples of walkways, and one of the examples is cobblestone. And I thought we should probably remove that because it's not ADA compliant. It's kind of nitpicky, but in 6.5.11.1, which kind of addresses community character, it references that it should have retained sort of similar colors as the surrounding neighborhood. And I thought that was a little bit constraining and outside of the kind of the spirit of what I see Humboldt communities, how Humboldt communities are. So I proposed just removing the "and colors" portion. And for 6.5.14.4, this is around rounding down for the number of units. If you end up with a number of units that's a decimal, and I would argue to round up. We round up for parking spaces. Let's round up for units as well. And then in 6.6.7, I would propose that we add at the end of that whichever is greater. So it refers to parcels which have undergone a lot split and limited to either 2 dwelling units per resultant parcel or the number of dwelling units that would be allowed. It felt clarifying if we say whichever is greater, if that's the intent.
I could be in support of those proposed changes.
I'd like to, not correct, adjust the perspective.
Correct is okay too. I'm okay being corrected.
For the calculations resulting in remainders. If we round up, we're granting more units than would be permitted otherwise.
That's the point.
Well, by a density bonus.
Does the density bonus require to round down?
It's required to round down.
So we're getting up on 8 o'clock, which is traditionally our break time, but we are also almost to the end of our agenda. So I kind of want to take the temperature of the commission, whether or not we think we are headed towards more discussion or whether or not we're headed towards a motion here, whether you would appreciate a break before we finish this out.
I would appreciate a break if commissioners would be accommodating of that.
Okay, let's go ahead and do a 10-minute break and come back at 7:57.
Recording in progress.
All right, let's come back from break and continue on item F2, I believe. Yep, F2. So we're still talking about mixed residential density ordinance.
May I add one thing?
Please.
To alter your suggested alteration for footpaths, sidewalks shall be ADA compliant hard surface, e.g. concrete, asphalt, or flat top cobblestone, some other third stone option.
Actually, you don't need to give examples of what the pavement is. Just ADA compliant.
As long as we get the commission to make the inclusion in their decision.
Okay, I see a couple of folks interested, so let's go with Commissioner McFarland and then Commissioner Kirazi and then
I just
Commissioner
wanted to do a
Scafto.
recap of the points that you brought up, Commissioner Kurzai. So the paint color, yes, that works. We just talked about the ADA, we don't need examples. Can you remind, and then the bonus, the rounding up, was that the only other one?
There were 2 more. The rounding up, but it sounds like because we're reliant on existing density bonus language, we can't. That would be modifying existing approved language in the different ordinance areas, so we can't do that. The second one was at the very last section. Oops. No, it's here. Yeah, thank you. Just adding whichever is greater. It's sort of like it's just making sure that we're compliant with government code. It's just a clarifying language.
We've added that.
And Commissioner Curiosity, did you have other comments?
I did. I kind of have my thoughts on the EIR addendum, which I have a few points. I don't know if there were other shorter points first.
I wanted to address and try to understand Commissioner Curiosity's concerns in the rural area. So I just wanted to banter that back and forth a little bit, if we could.
Yeah.
And because I really do understand your concern that we're trying to encourage development in the urban and suburban areas, and particularly as, what we approve with the RCAP.
If it's specifically infill development. I mean, it's not like I'm opposed to these communities.
No, I understand, but that's where we want the denser development, right? But I also recognize in these small rural communities, and granted there's not a lot of employment there, but there are people that live there and have lived there for generations. And we're talking about existing parcels that are already zoned R1 or R2. So they can be developed already with a McMansion or maybe a fourplex now if we do this. And those communities also have people that need low-cost housing. In fact, I can argue there's even a greater need in some of those really rural, poor communities for some lower-cost housing. So, and I don't think we're going to see a significant influx. In fact, we might not see anything happen. But if somebody did want to build a fourplex in Miranda or Weot on a parcel that's currently zoned R1 for residential, I really don't think it's going to have much of an impact as it relates to the RCAP or infill development in a larger community. And I think it's something that those communities could really benefit from. So I'm going to have a problem if we're going to exclude that opportunity there. I don't think that's fair, and I think it is a need in those communities. And so I wanted to express that. While I recognize your concern, there's another side for the housing concern as well.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that, and I think we're in agreement. Actually, I think really my challenge is how we're justifying it in the EIR addendum, and just sort of the precedent being set there. So I think in general, I'm in agreement as well that housing there is okay, but to say that we're going to the vehicle trips are going to be reduced and the vehicle trip lengths are going to be reduced. And then also the greenhouse gas section just doesn't even acknowledge that. That's what I'm struggling with.
That I fully understand.
I do have a question to staff. I'll wait.
I have an alternative for you.
Okay.
State law was just passed that exempts housing ordinances altogether.
Provided they were in the housing element.
It exempts what?
The adoption of ordinances to implement a housing element that's been adopted, certified by HCD.
I see. Exempts in terms of we don't have to have the CEQA addendum.
Correct.
Right.
So the action would be to find it exempt according to Public Resources Code. I'm not going to pull that out of my head.
I think while you do that, I think that this would just be kind of an unfortunate example of where it's one size fits all doesn't quite work. And I think part of the challenge is we're still, as you pointed out, we're still using the 2017 General Plan Update, EIR. So, and I think the language that you're putting in here is pulling from that.
I understand that. We're willing to change that. We can go and spend $20,000 or $30,000 on a traffic study, if that would help. I mean, although it's exempt now. I do understand your point that it's not necessarily going to reduce trips. But the objective is to absolutely provide housing in areas where the EIR absolutely did envision housing. And the amount of housing that's being developed does not exceed the amount of housing that was evaluated in the EIR. That's true. And so an addendum to the EIR is very simple if it's just modified to say the EIR contemplated the amount of traffic that will be generated by this.
Yep, I absolutely appreciate that. And sort of in my notes when I was reviewing here, I was writing that perhaps I just don't even have grounds for this for exactly those reasons. And so I'm starting to just disagree with an already approved EIR, which is not what's before us. And so I hear you, but at the same time, I'm putting a vote in approving language that is, it's legislative. It's not quasi-judicial, but I'm approving the language here, and so that's where I'm struggling.
Absolutely agree with that, and I understand your struggle. I mean, we spent a lot of time on the RCAP, and I think it's a pretty good document to guide the whole county forward, and I don't want to ignore it at all. I think the struggle is, and maybe I don't completely understand what you're advocating for, is that we also have a document that was adopted by the Planning Commission or recommended for approval by the Planning Commission and adopted by the Board of Supervisors, saying that we're going to adopt this ordinance within the housing zones. And so we've got these competing interests. And so I would submit for your consideration that you're not compromising your core thoughts about the importance of the RCAP. You're focusing on what we've agreed to do in the housing element.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess to clarify, I'm not trying to implement the RCAP here. I was just trying to use it as for examples. So I guess to maybe we'll go back to this. That was the state law that was just passed, maybe after I bring this up. But so for possible solutions, is it possible to remove from the transportation section of the EIR addendum the part of a sentence which says which should reduce vehicle trips and trip length, and just simply remove that?
We will gladly remove that, and we will rewrite that to indicate that the amount of housing that would be amount of traffic that would be generated by this amount of new housing development was contemplated in the EIR.
And did the greenhouse gas section of the 2017 GPU include greenhouse gases from transportation trips? Because it doesn't, it just addresses energy in this.
Well, it didn't to the extent that the mitigation for that was the RCAP.
Oh, it did. Can you repeat that one more time?
It did, and then it identified the mitigation for that's the RCAP.
Okay. My last question is, you have a wildfire section in the addendum, and are any of these areas in a high severity or a very high severity wildfire area, and do we need to contemplate that, or can we contemplate that?
Can absolutely contemplate that. I'm going to need to, did you look at that?
They are, at least some, in high fire hazard severity
But not-
zones. I don't believe in very high.
Okay. Yeah, Garberville's a high fire hazard zone. I think Redway is as well, probably Miranda. Right, but they are served by fire districts.
Yeah, I don't think we've considered that in past projects either, but I thought I would.
We actually do. The policy in the general plan is that if you're approving development in a high fire hazard area that doesn't have a district formed, you've got to record something on the property indicating that so future buyers are aware of that. But I believe that all these areas that are housing opportunity zones are within districts.
Okay, then I think I'm leaning. That sounds like, well, I guess maybe wrapping up. Is staff proposing potentially throwing out the EIR addendum in favor of?
No, that's how we noticed it. I think we're proposing to make the modifications that we talked about and asking you to adopt or consider the addendum, consider the IR. And based upon your testimony today, you've thoroughly considered it.
Is the commission open to removing that portion of the sentence in the transportation sector section?
I am, yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then I think I saw Commissioner Scafdall, you had some comments to make?
No,
No? Okay.
I'm ready to make a motion, if we're ready. Not sure how to do that, but I'll take a stab at it.
Appreciate you accommodating my complexity.
I'm going to move that we adopt the resolution which finds the Planning Commission has considered the environmental impact report previously adopted for the general plan, as well as the addendum with the EIR that was prepared for the mixed residential density ordinance project pursuant to the CEQA guidelines, with the changes that we noted here today. And I'm not going to repeat those. Finds that the project is in the public interest and consistent with the general plan and state planning law, and recommends the Board of Supervisors adopts the mixed residential density ordinance with alternative 1 for the parking element, and I'm sorry I don't have the other page.
It's just the line, the section.
Oh, what that said, yeah. So that's my motion.
Director Ford, would you mind just so we're all on the same page, I think there were 4 changes, what those are?
Did you include the changes in your motion?
Yes.
Okay, so the changes were to remove color from the design requirements, to remove the specificity relative to the pavement type and identify that needs to be ADA accessible. And in section 6.6.7, the end of the paragraph would be whichever is greater. The 4th one is rounding up, but that was inconsistent with the density bonus, so there's actually 3 changes. Yeah, no, he identified the addendum separately.
I would second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on the motion before we take a vote? Please.
I think I'm leaning towards alternative 2, so I'm considering no on this motion.
Okay, may we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Scavdall,
Yes.
Commissioner Fulton,
Yes.
Commissioner McFarland,
No.
Commissioner Curriasi,
No.
Commissioner West.
No.
Motion fails.
Okay, do we have an alternative motion?
Yeah, so the motion failed. That's not an action on it, that's lack of an action. So now,
I would be open to the exact same proposal you made, but with alternative 2 for the parking.
Okay, can you remind me, just be specific what alternative 2 parking is? I don't have that.
I can. So it is, so alternative 1 has 4 or more residential units, has a minimum off-street parking of 1 space per unit. Alternative 2 is 4 or 5 units, have a minimum required off-street parking of 1 per unit. And units of 6 or more that are also within a half mile of a bus stop that has service at least twice daily, Monday through Saturday. Off-street parking is 1 per 2 units.
So since it's the same as alternative 1, but reduces off-street parking in the vicinity of a bus stop?
4 units with 6 or more.
Yes.
for larger projects.
For larger parcels.
Yep.
I think it's modest change. I'm not going to have a problem with that.
So are you restating your motion to be the same motion?
I'll
you
let
made?
Commissioner McFarland take the lead.
Have to can I make a motion to repeat Commissioner Scavdall's motion with the change
Yes.
from alternative 1 to 2?
I'll second that. Okay, we have a new motion and a new second on the floor. Any more discussion about this second motion before we take a vote? Okay, let's go ahead and roll call again, please.
Commissioner Fulton,
Yes.
Commissioner McFarland,
Yes.
Commissioner Curriasi,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Commissioner Scavdall.
In the interest of housing, yes, and I'll try not to say I told you so later. But no
But if
promises.
you do, as you reminded me, we can bring this back up for discussion and redo it.
There you go.
Okay, that's going to bring us to our next agenda item. Item G, items pulled from consent. We covered that already. Item H, report from planner.
Yeah, I want to just give you a quick update. The Board of Supervisors upheld the Planning Commission's actions on the Humboldt Commons. And so that was really kind of a tight vote. It was 3-2, but it was upheld. They also upheld the Planning Commission recommendation on the Westfall General Plan Amendment, zone amendment, and Williams Neck contract cancellation. And then, if you didn't see, they revoked 44 cannabis permits due to noncompliance with the cannabis ordinance. Now, I just wanted to kind of give you an update on the Humboldt Bay Area plan that is going to start heading into the news and public forum. The public review draft, this is not the ultimate draft that the Planning Commission will see, but the public review draft is going to be coming out in June. Then we're going to have a public meeting, I think on June 16th. And that will be to just receive the kind of comments from the public and gauge concerns. And then
What date is that again?
June 16th. We'll be sending out a flyer on that. And then we're going to bring a workshop to the Planning Commission in July. And then we expect to come back to the Planning Commission to start the public hearing process in September. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you for, when we know that we have a more contentious policy topic, that you do a workshop. I think it's a format that seemed to work well for us, and I appreciate you making the time for it. Okay, let's move on to Planning Commission discussion items.
I have a
Please go on.
question. I think in hindsight, I probably, it would have been more appropriate to ask it to pull the progress report on the housing element and ask this question, but I'm hoping it's okay to do so now.
Sure.
I'm just curious from the implementation measure in the housing element where the planning commission may recommend to the board of supervisors that amendments be initiated if the progress report shows insufficient progress has been made. And I was just curious if staff had guidance. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but like
No.
how we can, what is insufficient progress to, or how should we think about that?
So insufficient progress could be that we're not getting enough housing element implementation measures done, but I think we've been bringing a match up pretty regularly over the last 6 months or so. It could be that we're not seeing enough housing built, and we're not. Realistically, given what our objectives are given by HCD. But I think that we would want to talk about the whys of that before trying to tackle that head on. We're going to be doing some new things with our housing and grants team to start to put together opportunities for partnerships between private, public. I mean, this is not new. Eureka's doing it right now. But it seems to be a model based upon somebody I talked to recently that's done housing, affordable housing for probably nearly 40 years, is that you really need to find partnerships to get things done. And so we've been able to do that with one local developer pretty effectively, but we'd like to speed up the pace of that, if that makes sense. But you can always bring that up as an item to be agendized and discuss that and make a recommendation to the board that, there should be different priorities or different emphasis or whatever it is.
Any other discussion items? Okay. Well, there are no further discussion items. Let's go ahead and adjourn until our next meeting on June 4th, 2026, 6 o'clock in these chambers.